Welcome to Hurt at Work, a Kentucky workers' comp podcast. Today, Louisville workers' compensation attorney Scott Scheynost is going to provide helpful information, tips, and advice for injured workers and their families. Scott's goal is to help you to maximize the benefits you receive. If working's got you hurting, sit back and listen to Scott address topics that matter to you. Well, we are back in the studio with Louisville workers' compensation attorney Scott Scheynost. Scott, welcome to the studio, guy. Good to see you.
Same here, Jim. Always a pleasure to be here.
Enjoying this. You know, we were talking as we were preparing this, and I really didn't think about how prevalent this topic has become. Today, we're going to talk about remote work injuries. These are people who are working from home who get injured. And I guess after COVID, things really shifted. More and more people were working from home. So this has got to be kind of a hot topic.
Boom. Everybody that works at home has the potential to be injured there. And everybody has a question about whether or not it's covered by workers' compensation.
Well, and that's the funny thing. It doesn't matter really where you work. You don't have to physically be inside a plant or physically inside an office. You're still working. And I think we're going to talk about that. Now, for the listeners, we want to specify, Scott is licensed to practice workers' compensation in Kentucky. This is going to apply to Kentucky law. Scott, I mean, that's other states. I guess this is an evolving area of law, right?
It's evolving as fast as the number of injuries, and different courts have different views in different states. Every state has its own workers' comp system with its own rules, regulations, and case law. And I'm not smart enough to know all 50 states, but we will try to educate you about Kentucky and what's going on here.
And so when we talk about the law evolving, I mean, workers' comp has been around forever, but I guess because, again, this is non-traditional location-based work, right? So, I mean, we're working from homes or places like that. So I guess it's a little fuzzy around the edges because there's a lot of, well, were you really working or not? You know, and so there's a lot of gray area here.
Right. Workers' comp actually started evolving in the late 1800s in England for help to assist people that were injured at factories. And that's what it was really designed to do. The whole system's designed for somebody that's a factory worker that has a problem doing that job, you know, running the mill, running the press machine, stuff like that. And over time, jobs have evolved, and the workers' comp system is trying to evolve too to catch up to it. But the whole system's based on somebody that gets hurt in a factory. You deal with adjusters, and you deal with judges, and you deal with attorneys that are just used to talking to somebody that's worked at a factory and got hurt. A lot of those traditional jobs have moved on to other places. With COVID coming in, there's been a big change in how people go to work, especially for the non-traditional factory jobs. People that work in offices and deal with internet have an opportunity now to work at home. A lot of them were required to work at home when COVID hit. So since people moved to work at home, that's increased the number of jobs that have actually occurred at home, and also correspondingly increased the number of injuries that might occur at home. The biggest question I think that anybody has is, you know, I'm not working at a factory. I'm working for an insurance company as a claims processor, and I got hurt at home. Since I'm not working for a factory at a specific location, can that still be covered by workers' comp? And the answer is it can be. And you have to look at some of the traditional things we look at in a workers' compensation claim. You know, are you at work when the injury occurred? Was your employer getting a benefit from the job? A couple of things like that. Kentucky's got some case law that specifically says that if you're at home and you get hurt while you're performing a job at home, that's governed by workers' compensation. This law is evolving as the number of people that work from home increases, and there may be changes in the regulations and the way the Department of Workers' Claims administers this and how judges feel, and there may be changes in the case law. But right now, if you get hurt at home and you're performing work for your employer when you get hurt, it is covered by workers' compensation.
You know, it's kind of interesting that we're talking about how this is evolving, but in all reality, workers' comp has already been covering people who don't necessarily work in an office or a factory.
Correct.
You and I met because for 22 years, I was a sales rep. I was out in the field every day.
Right.
And if I were to get injured, and as we've talked about in previous episodes, those are still covered under Kentucky workers' comp law.
You don't have to be in a specific location. Some people don't have a location they work from at all, not even their house. Some people are traveling salesmen. Some people maybe route people for different companies, or they may go from one spot to another to repair equipment. You know, if they get injured while they're preparing equipment, if they get injured while they're traveling, if their job is one that doesn't require them to actually have a specific location, but to travel all the time while they're traveling. And even if they're in a hotel room and slip and fall, can still be covered by workers' comp. So we've got, I guess, two areas now to look at for remote work. It's the traditional person that used to work in an office that's now working from home, which is a big area that's kind of evolving. And then we've got the other ones that have always been covered by workers' compensation. There really wasn't much question about. There's a lot of gray areas for both of them, but for the main one that people, I guess, are more concerned about right now, working at an office from home. First of all, that can be covered by workers' compensation in Kentucky. I think you got to look at the specifics of what's going on. There are cases that say it can be covered. Again, the more work you're actually doing, if you're sitting in front of a computer and it blows up on you while you're performing data entry, for instance, that seems to be clearly work related.
Right. I got that severe paper cut I called you about the other day.
Well, and that can be work related. Now, if you get up and go to the bathroom while you're working on a computer and you slip and fall, in your bath while you're
well, you trip over something on the way.
Yeah, is that work related? Well, there aren't any real clear cases on that, and a lot of that I think depends on exactly what were you doing. If you were at a place of employment and had to get up and walk into a restroom and work contributed somehow to the accident, I think that would be covered. And everybody's got to take a break every now and then. Now, if you have to clock in at a certain time and you clock out and the accident happens 4 hours later, that's probably not going to be covered. If you're putting on a roof on your house and your insurance claims adjuster, that's probably not going to be work related. But there's a lot of other things that will be. And again, if you're doing work, if you're clearly in the scope of your employment when the injury occurs, you stand a substantial chance of having workers' compensation apply. A lot of the injuries aren't going to be real significant. If you are at home and you get the paper cut, that's probably not worth discussing a whole lot about because nobody's going to really want to mess with it. But I have had cases where people got up from work, tripped over something, and literally fractured their neck and ended up having cervical fusions and had really significant injuries from that. So,
well, I remember I had boxes of files. I had those old bankers boxes of files and things. So you've got to move those around sometimes. You could still, pop your back. You could still, do all sorts of different things because it does. And if I have a different type of job where I'm physically moving something to my truck so I can go out on a service call or something like that, I'm still going to have these more traditional types of injuries, right?
You can hurt your back. You can be data entry and you get repetitive motion. It causes carpal tunnel syndrome.
Exactly.
The case I was talking about earlier, I think, discusses a lady that worked for a company that she was on the phone and got up while she was talking on the phone and tripped over something and hurt herself real bad. Well, that was covered by work because she was on the phone. You need to look at all the specific facts to determine if it fits, in the workers' compensation realm. But again, if you're working from home and get injured, if it happens while you're working, then there's a good chance that's going to be covered by workers' comp. But again, you got to look at the specific nature of what you're doing, specific nature of your job, exactly what benefit the employer is getting from what you're doing. And in general, if you're performing something that benefits the employer while the accident happens, it's going to be work-related.
That makes sense. And again, there are some common injuries, right, that we might expect. And obviously there's always going to be something new that comes up. But I would think, as you said, okay, I tripped and I fell at home while I was working, so maybe I've got a broken bone, maybe I've got a fracture, maybe I hit my head somewhere. I mean, all sorts of things related to that. Back and neck strains, depending on what I'm doing. I like the fact that you brought up repetitive use because that's something that I think a lot of people overlook because it wasn't just one activity or one instance where all of a sudden I heard a pop or I felt something tear. It just aches really, really bad because I've been doing this for 20 years.
Yeah, repetitive motion injuries are governed by workers' compensation in Kentucky, and you've got to show that your work contributed to the repetitive nature of the injury, or the degenerative nature of the injury. Those get to be real interesting, but essentially, if you're doing something that requires a lot of repetitive motion and it wears your body down, that can be covered by workers' compensation. Well,
let me step away for just a second and let the listeners know. If you're listening to this and you have access to the show notes, that's that series of paragraphs below probably the button you click to listen to this particular podcast episode, you're going to see in those notes links to different pages on Scott's site and also links to previously recorded episodes. So as we talk about this, you might see something where maybe we have talked about this before more in depth and more specifically. So feel free to click on those links and you'll be able to access those other related episodes very easily. Let me kind of bring us back to this.
Sure.
One of the things that we've talked about before were car accidents. If I'm a sales rep, for instance, and obviously I'm not going to be at the company headquarters, I'm probably going to be on the road if I'm in the field doing this.
Right. This all kind of goes into principle we call the going and coming rule in workers' compensation. And essentially that rule says that you're not covered by workers' compensation until you go to work. And then that's a gray area. Where does work start? Well, for somebody that works at a factory, that essentially starts when you go onto the factory's premises. If you go into a parking lot that's controlled just by the factory and you slip and fall on ice on that parking lot and they have exclusive control over that parking lot, that's a work-related injury, even though you haven't clocked in yet. Now, if you go into work at a shopping center and you slip and fall on ice in that shopping center, but that shopping center's parking lot is open to the public and not controlled specifically by your employer, that is not work-related.
Interesting.
So there's a little bit of a gray area that goes with the going and coming rule, and that's really what controls whether or not an injury is at work or is covered by workers' compensation. So for the salesman, he's not going to a specific spot every day. When does
I did go to Starbucks often?
Well,
but not going to an office necessarily.
Interesting enough, that probably would have been covered by workers' compensation if you did not have a specific office, because once you get into the car for somebody that doesn't have a specific place to go to, a lot of times that's considered as the beginning of the going and coming rule, because you're not going to go to a specific place every day. So when does it start? And workers' comp tends to give you the benefit of the doubt on that, and once you start traveling, it becomes work-related. For instance, you might be traveling to Seattle for a seminar to give a presentation for your employer. Once you get into the Uber, and the Uber has a car accident on the way to the airport, that's probably covered by workers' compensation. Even if you're on those kind of trips and you're in a hotel room and you slip and fall in a hotel room at 9 o'clock at night, that's probably governed by workers' compensation, because you would not have been in the hotel room if it hadn't been for this long distance travel that you had to perform. So the going and coming rule is a little bit hard to understand, and it's a little bit like a moving target, because again, the facts are real specific to it. We have to look at these gray areas to see where it starts and applies, and sometimes the court moves the target around a little bit. But essentially, if you're not going to a specific spot, once you start doing stuff for your employer, it's usually going to be governed by the going and coming rule and covered by workers' compensation.
Well, I believe you and I have spoken in the past. Let's say I am a field sales rep. I'm in my car. I'm making my appointments, and I decide to deviate. Hey, I'm going to go pick up my son or my daughter from school. And on the way to their school, which is not a job-related activity, I'm in an accident, that may be outside the bounds of comp, wouldn't it? Of Kentucky's comp.
Now we're getting that gray area.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we'll look at if it's a substantial deviation. For instance, if the school is an hour and a half away, if you're, traveling from Evansville to St. Louis, but you decide to go to Murray to pick up the kids, that's probably a substantial enough deviation to where that's not going to be work-related. Now, if you're going from Evansville to St. Louis and, the elementary school happens to be on the same route that you're going,
sure, I'm going to stop off.
That may not be a substantial deviation, and time involved in it, whether or not you're using a company car, other things like that, probably come into play. So, and we're using maybe Indiana examples when we should be using Kentucky.
Well, okay. So I'm driving around Louisville, and I decided to stop off at the dry cleaners, in between appointments. One could argue, I would think that, well, the dry cleaner wasn't a client, so maybe you're outside of company time.
Well, again, it's a substantial deviation. How much of a deviation is this from your normal work? Going to the post office, a lot of times that's come up in a couple cases, and I believe that's been ruled to be not a substantial deviation. So, again, these are a little bit fact-specific. In general, the more you're going to deviate from the trip, the more likely it is not going to be work-related, but some employees have nothing but travel all the time.
Right.
Okay, and they've got to go to the dry cleaner because they're not going to be home for 4 weeks. That's actually part of the job. If they don't get a clean suit, then they're not going to get the sale. So, that is work-related in those situations.
That's interesting. Let's deviate just a little bit while we're talking about people who are driving. This could be a delivery driver. This could be a sales rep. This could be someone else. Right. You have spoken before about third-party accidents. Can we just spend a couple of minutes, because I think it really is relevant in this situation.
Yeah, motor vehicle accidents for somebody that might be a route salesman or maybe a technician that has to go do repairs and stuff like that. Almost always, if they're on company time, those are going to be work-related. And the only problem that might occur is that substantial deviation that we were talking about before. If they're going from the place where they've been assigned to fix a press machine, maybe to McDonald's to get something to eat from lunch, and then they were going to another place after that. Well, that probably has to occur. They got to eat somewhere. That's probably not a substantial deviation. But again, if they're supposed to drive up to northern Kentucky to fix some presses up there, but they decide to go to Kings Island because they're just 2 hours away, well, that probably is.
Right.
You got to look at the specific facts. But in general, when people are just doing their job and doing the normal things that are associated with the job, including taking breaks, restroom breaks, lunch breaks, stuff like that, and they're performing service for their employer outside of a specific location and they have a motor vehicle accident, that is two things. First of all, it's probably a workers' compensation claim, but also it's probably another third-party lawsuit if the accident was caused by a negligent third party. So,
and so this is not only a claim that I file under the Kentucky Workers' Compensation Law, which you handle,
right.
but that also is a civil lawsuit, which is a personal injury lawsuit.
Assuming somebody else,
assuming somebody else is negligent.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. And these cases can happen simultaneously,
right? They can happen simultaneously. I can throw 3 or 4 other scenarios where it might be a Social Security claim involved in it.
Yeah.
Some, other things that might make this more complicated. And the bottom line is the number one for workers' comp purposes, realize it is workers' comp claim. And number 2, talk to an attorney that does workers' comp, and they can probably walk through the other things that might be available if that happens. But I think that's an important thing to remember. It could be 2-3 things at once.
Exactly.
Not just workers' comp, and not just a car accident, and not just Social Security disability. It could be several things rolled into one, and the person could recover from all 3. And then we worry about who gets paid back what, but that's something else for another podcast.
Right.
But
absolutely. But again, that's the risk of there's nothing in the law that says you have to have an attorney.
Correct.
But there's a lot you don't know.
Right. I think number one, the thing to remember is that even though you're not at work, it still could be work-related. And a lot of it depends on what you're doing. If you're doing service for your employer, for what we call the scope of employment.
That makes sense.
The more you're doing for your employer, the more the benefit the employer is getting out of it. For instance, if you're data entering at home and the computer blows up, and you wouldn't be data entering if it wasn't for the employer. That's probably going to clearly be work-related. You're probably not going to have much of an issue for that. The farther you get away from that with the things you were mentioning, the deviations from the trips, maybe, somebody's taking a restroom break, other things going on, is it necessary for somebody to actually go out and check the mail, at home while they're at work? And, all those kind of things kind of enter into the picture about whether or not it's in the scope of employment. We'll look a little bit harder at what the benefit is for the employer out of this, what actually this person doing. I wouldn't be surprised if we get some more specific regulations and rules, and I'm pretty sure we'll probably end up getting some cases that decide these issues in a couple of years. And some of these things that are a little bit gray right now will be a little bit more black and white probably in a couple of years, because I know the scope of people working from home has increased, and with that there has to be an increase in the amount of people that actually get injured at home. A lot of times there's a year or 2 lag between when somebody gets an injury and when it actually shows up in my office, and then there's another year or 2 lag after we start arguing about it and going before judges and trying to get cases decided before something actually shows up in the court system.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting comment. If I am injured, though, and I'm going to seek out representation, I'm going to contact an attorney and hire the attorney. Sooner is better than later, right?
Well, if you're going to call an attorney, you might as well call them at the beginning, because there's so many factors that can be important in your case as it goes on. Doctors you choose, discussions with the claims adjusters, how much money you get out of this while you're off work. Even if they're paying you money for being off work and you don't think there's any dispute about the workers' comp claim, there's still things that probably need to be checked if you're being paid the actual correct wage. And my general rule is if it looks like it's going to be a permanent injury, give an attorney a call. You're going to need us probably sooner as opposed to later, but you might as well call it sooner because it'll be the same fee and we'll give you the same advice, and we can help you kind of manage the way this is done, navigate the system a little bit easier, and hopefully end up with a better result for you in the long run. And it kind of aggravates me a little bit when people wait till the end of the treatment to call me, because we probably could help them get a couple of things done sooner if they contact me. And it would actually even help resolve their claim sooner if we get involved in it sooner. We get medical records and stuff like that to give us a better picture of where all this is going. But that's my problem, not yours yet. I hope you don't have it. But again, most attorneys that handle workers' compensation, myself included, handle these on a contingency fee, which means we don't charge you anything unless we recover money for you. And there's some costs and stuff and expenses involved in that may have to be included. But it doesn't cost anything to call me or a lot of other attorneys that do this. If you've got a question about whether or not it's work-related or any of this stuff comes up, it doesn't hurt to call us right now. We can walk through these things. I talk to people a couple times a day about these issues. I've got 5 emails I've got to respond to after this is done regarding that, and I don't mind doing that. That's part of the business. But go ahead and find out from somebody that knows this system. If you need some help, ask them.
Well, I think that's an important point. Someone who knows this system. Don't call your divorce lawyer about a workers' compensation claim, right?
Well, a good divorce lawyer will refer you to a good workers' comp attorney, but sometimes they don't know each other. We do a lot of workers' compensation, and especially in Kentucky, and we've been doing this for about 30 years. I'm happy to talk to anybody about workers' compensation. And again, it's a free call. It doesn't cost anything. If you don't want to talk to me anymore, you don't have to. You don't have to sign anything but call me. But again, I think we can give you some light to help you get to the end of the tunnel and get this over with. Workers' comp's just a horrible process. I've yet to have anybody that was a client that actually enjoyed going through the workers' comp system. And it's not designed to make you feel better. It's not designed to put you back where you were before. It's actually designed to, my view is to keep you from blowing up the company's factory, give somebody just enough to where they'll be happy, and we don't have to worry about having a revolution out there. And workers' comp seems to be cut every time the legislature meets. So it's not designed for the person that's been injured. It's really designed to kind of get this over with and let everybody go on with their lives. And there's so many little factors that can come into this that can have an impact on what you get at the end of this.
Well, but that's where your knowledge and your experience really comes into play for your clients, is because when they're getting kind of pushed around or jerked around a little bit. When, hey, this is being denied, it shouldn't be denied. Right. And you can actually go represent them at a hearing to say, no, wait a minute, this is important and this is reasonable.
Yeah, well, and let me give some free advice right now about all this stuff, because if somebody gets hurt at home, the first question is going to be, what should I do? Well, if you do get hurt at home and you're a remote worker, one of the first things you need to do is contact your supervisor and let them know you got hurt.
Very important. In fact, it's required. Right?
It is required. In Kentucky, you've got to give notice to your employer in a reasonable amount of time that you have an injury. Well, hopefully that's right after it occurs. If you're in a factory and your supervisor see you get run over by a forklift, he has notice.
Right.
If you're at home and your supervisor's in Toronto, Canada, they're not going to know till you tell them. Well, if something happens, you need to let them know as soon as possible. Does it have to be that day? Hopefully it is that day. Sometimes people get hurt and they want to see how it goes, and they want to give it a little bit of time before they report it. Most people don't want to report a workers' comp injury. If it takes a couple of days, that's probably okay too, but you need to give your supervisor notice of the injury within a reasonable amount of time, and that's so they can do a reasonable investigation.
That's their right.
That's right. And the workers' comp carrier, the workers' comp carrier and the employer both need to know if this is a legitimate claim. So you need to give them notice of the injury so they can determine whether this is a legitimate claim, that you weren't hurt playing basketball with the kids outside, whatever the reason is.
During work hours.
During work hours. I know that never happens. But seriously, you've got to give notice to the employer about the injury, and you need to do that as soon as you practically can. It should be as soon as possible. But again, it can be delayed a little bit while you investigate this yourself. Some people have an incident, they don't even know it's work-related.
Right.
I didn't know this was workers' comp. My doctor told me that when I went and saw him. Well, you need to tell your employer as soon as that doctor tells you that. Once you give notice, then you need to get medical treatment for this. And in Kentucky, you get to pick the doctor you want to go to.
That's a really often confused point, isn't it?
It is, and most employers will tell the injured worker, at least this has been my experience, most employers will tell the injured worker they have to go to a specific doctor. And there's usually a reason the employer wants you to go to a specific doctor or practice, and that's because they've got a relationship with that doctor or practice. And that relationship's not really designed to help the injured employee get better. It's designed to help the employer save money in workers' compensation claims. And there's a bunch of different ways they can do that I'm not going to get into right now. But if you do get hurt at home, you need to give notice to your employer as soon as possible. And then you need to seek medical treatment with a physician, a provider that you trust. What I normally tell folks to do is contact their family doctor.
Start there.
And the family doctor is not wanting to make your employer happy. They're wanting to get you better. Most family doctors don't really make much of doing it because they want to help people. And your family doctor will probably want to help you, and they'll probably help you get the care you need sooner and better than the workers' comp carrier will give you advice to go see doctors. So once you get hurt, go see somebody you pick, hopefully your family doctor. If not your family doctor, you pick out the doctor. Don't let your employer do that. And then you need to see where the medical treatment's going. There's a couple other things that you get. If you do get hurt at home and it is work-related, you get not only medical treatment, you get money for being off work, 2/3 of your average weekly wage with a bunch of limits. You get any kind of medical expense, for instance, mileage expense going back and forth to the doctor, physical therapy. If you incur prescriptions, those are paid. If you have braces or you have to get crutches or something like that, that's all workers' comp too. So, these are things an attorney can spell out a little bit better for you. But if you do get hurt at work, number one, tell your employer that you got hurt. Number two, seek medical treatment. And number three, start following the doctor's advice.
Well, and that's one of the things that I enjoy, listening to you on these podcasts. And we've worked together for a very long time. But the advice you give, I mean, if someone is injured and it's work-related, they're entitled to specific benefits, and they just may not know about it. But when they engage somebody like you, Scott, I mean, the nice thing is you're able to say, hey, did you know? You actually, track your mileage. That is reimbursable. Track this, track this. I had to go see a specialist out of town. Well, that even the hotel stay could be covered, right?
Even in those first 2 or 3 things we were talking about somebody needs to do, there's a couple of things that I've had different clients tell me their workers' comp carrier employer denied they would pay for, like mileage expense. Well, we don't do that. Well, they're supposed to.
Yeah.
If they don't, then
they just may not want to.
That's generally what it is, because it requires them, number one, to pay money they don't want to pay, increase their workers' comp. But also the adjuster's got to go through the mileage expense you submit, ask for a check, verify it, get it approved by their boss, and they really don't want to mess with it. The other thing, too, is you're entitled to 2/3 of your average weekly wage. A lot of people get paid hourly. Let's say they get paid $10 an hour. Well, that means they're going to get for a 40-hour week, $400, and 2/3 of that, $277, whatever that amount is going to be paid out in workers' comp benefits. A lot of people also get overtime, which is also considered in your average weekly wage in Kentucky. Bonuses are also considered, and it's complicated how that's figured. If you get a year-end bonus, then that's supposed to be divided by 52 and then added onto your average weekly wage. A lot of claims adjusters, though, and I really don't like to do the math myself, but I do it. But a lot of folks that pay these benefits out don't want to go through all the math in these things like overtime and bonuses.
Well, and it also includes income that you might derive from a side job.
Concurrent employment. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, that can also be added into it too, and that's something that you've got to bring to the attention of the adjuster, or again, it won't count. So there's a lot of little things like that can add up, not only for money for being off work, but really when you get to the end of this case, these are all big factors in how much money somebody gets for the problem. So all these things kind of build on each other, and a lot of folks will have the injury and call me back a year later after the injury when they're done with the doctor, but they didn't get the mileage expense. They were being paid the incorrect average weekly wage for being off work. There's already a whole set of things that they may already be owed by the time they call me. If they would have called me at the beginning, we probably could have worked through a lot of those things and had that money in their pocket sooner.
And it would have made life a lot easier along the way, I guess.
Most people off work are having a hard time making ends meet, and it slows you down. You not only do you have the work-related injury you got to deal with, but there's other things that you can't do. And unfortunately, there's some things, like taking the kids to baseball practice that workers' comp won't reimburse you for. But you got to get, Cousin Bob to do that, and then Cousin Bob, a barbecue the next week, and all this tends to add up, and it can have even more monetary value than a barbecue.
I used to cut my own grass. Now I got to pay the kid in the neighborhood to do it.
And unfortunately, that's not usually reflected in the workers' comp benefits you're going to receive, because you just get these average weekly wage, 2/3 of that while you're off work. But there are some things that just don't get paid for in the workers' comp system that cause a burden on people. And again, the more money we can put in somebody's pocket at the beginning, the better off generally they're going to be.
That makes a lot of sense. Hey, Scott, if I've been listening to this and I'm thinking, that makes sense. I did get hurt at home. I was doing work-related activity and I sustained an injury. How should I start this process?
Well, again, the first thing they need to do is to contact their employer, make sure that they have noticed the injury, make sure the medical treatment's going. Once that's under control, give me or some other attorney a call. Especially if you think you have a permanent problem.
Well, and that was my question. That was the lead into this question. Then, how do I do that? What's the best phone number to use? How do I actually get in touch with you?
Yeah, my number is 502-937-5287. That's the best way to reach me. We also have a website, ScheynostLaw.com, SCHEYNOSTLAW.com, and there's a contact form. You can reach me on that. But either one of those ways will work. I think we also have a chat service through the website, too.
Yep.
If you go to our website, you can chat and leave some information there, and we'll get back with you. So I think I had two of those today, as a matter of fact. But get in touch with us, and we will get in touch with you. We'll try to get back with you as soon as we can, and we'll try to work through these issues for you. We'll talk to you and try to figure out if you actually need an attorney today. If you don't, I'll try to be honest about that too. But again, usually the criteria in this is if you think you're going to have a permanent problem, or if you're not getting the benefits you deserve, they're not paying the right money, if you're not getting the medical treatment, if you're not getting the medical expenses from mileage, stuff like that. Sometimes we have employers that don't have workers' comp insurance. That gets more interesting.
Right. Right.
And
we've had an episode on that.
We've had an episode on that. So there's all kinds of little issues that can cause you to get an attorney today and actually have to file things. But for the most part, if you've got an injury, give us a call. We'll work through all these things and try to give you our 2 cents, and you can decide what to do.
Outstanding.
Free call.
Outstanding. Scott, I want to thank you. I know you're busy. I know, like you said, you've got 4 or 5 emails that you've got to respond to when you get back to the office. I appreciate your time because I know how busy you are. It takes us a while to kind of get these episodes scheduled as well. But you're always going to bring a lot of really good qualified information to these podcast episodes, and I really want to thank you for that. If you've been listening, I hope you found this information helpful. I hope you found it insightful. We always encourage people that if you like this podcast, please consider sharing this episode out on your favorite social media. We post this out to Scott's Facebook page. I mean, if you're on Facebook, come find us and share that out so a lot of other people can learn about this information, and more importantly, can learn about how Scott may be able to help them. So once again, thank you for listening, and we'll be back in about 2 weeks. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Hurt at Work. Scott will be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. For more information, be sure to visit ScheynostLaw.com. That's SCHEYNOST law.com. You can also follow Scott's Workers' Comp office on Facebook. Until next time, be safe and remember, Scott's ready to help, especially when you and your family need it the most.